Very good afternoon to all the viewers, including corporates and have logged in from different corners of the world today. My name is Sushil and I'm part of the Amity Institute of Training and Development team here. I'm your host for the session today, and we are going to discuss today various facets, advantages and disadvantages of the conventional as well as behavioral event interview technique, which is the theme for the session today as well. Behavioral event interview, BEI, which is largely it is known as, is a science-based interview technique that increases your probability of hiring the right talent and also finding a better fit for your existing talent as well. Beyond their structured approach, there are additional benefits to using behavioral interviews, since behavioral interviews are based on an analysis of job duties and requirements of the job as well. Bias and ambiguity are reduced because candidates are evaluated on job-related questions. So what are the challenges of conducting a BEI interview, how it has evolved in the current times, and what is set to change in the current new normal, how businesses and corporates can reap benefits of this technique successfully. To discuss all these facets and other benefits of a BEI-based interview, we have invited today Dr. Vijit Chaturvedi, Professor from the Department of HR, OB and Psychology, Amity Business School, Noida, to enlighten us today. Dr. Chaturvedi, please.
Good afternoon, Sushilji, and everyone, the audience hearing, and thank you for the humble introduction. We'll be discussing about the behavioral event interviewing and how this has emerged as an excellent technique, though little older, but to be used in the multi-facets.
Great. So let me start with a basic formal question from the perspective of BEI. How can the conventional interviews facilitate in reviewing inconsistency in approach while dealing with different candidates to predict the future behavior of that particular employee? How is it going to be a different outcome predicting by the ways of using BEI?
Absolutely. It's a very basic and most introductory question, Sushilji, because if we look about interviewing is the most important step in the employee selection, and of course, whether it is for routine career planning, whether it is for succession planning, this is a basic step. And there is a lot of data the moment we start looking at different websites, different organizational practices. This is something which reflects the values of an organization, wherein the job interview is one tool which is the base for selection of employees. And from times immemorial, there had been number of techniques, a mix of structured, unstructured, semi-structured. But if you see the whole pack, it is actually about how can you predict the future of the employee. So it is more about predictive power. How strong are your interviews that they can predict the power of employee success? And that is the reason, as we have moved ahead with the advent of technology, with the advent of supportive psychological tools, we have number of tools which can assess and which can give a fair idea upon whether the job competencies will match or not, or whether one single interview or a series of interview as a part of your recruitment and selection process is suitable and comprehensive enough to evaluate both the present as well as the future of the employee and the expected returns which he or she is going to get. So if we look at a little basic, whenever we are talking about any interview, and especially when we are moving towards an innovative way to look upon to bring the right talent at the workplace or on the board, we need to look upon two important components. One, what is the content of the interview? And second important thing, how are we evaluating it? So what is the evaluation structure? So if we look in general, this can be classified as, okay, this is the content structure and this is the evaluation structure. Because most of the organization, irrespective of their size, spread, their geographical presence, their nature of operations, we can look at these are the basic elements of an interview. So if you look at the content part of an interview, it basically would cover what the job is about, who would be the interviewers, one has to ask the appropriate question, the length or the duration of the interview, and so on. If you look at the other part, the evaluation part, the evaluation structure, very, very important things are: number one, what kind of rating scale are we using? What is the basic objective of the interview? While taking the interview, are you taking any notes? So are you judging the people simply on the basis of whatever they have shared with you, whether it was their technical aspect, whether it was their behavioral aspect, whether it was related to their functional aspect, and so on. So very important is the fact is, while we are looking for ideal interviews, or while we are looking for holistic assessment of a candidate, one, are we clear with what is the objective of the interview? Are we trying to predict the functional competencies or the technical or maybe the behavioral part of the candidate or the incumbent? And then how are we relating it? What kind of rating scale are we using? It can be as deep as a 10-point rating scale. It can be as narrow as a yes or a no question, and so on. And then whichever way you are doing it, whether it's a panel interview, whether it's a stress-based interview, whether it could be a case study-based interview, anything. It would depend upon what category of interview it is. But a very important gap is, are we able to relate the objectives of the interview with the behavioral, the functional, that means to put together the competency set of people, because it is only that job description which people have on the basis of which people's performance has to be evaluated. So does it has any synchronization with the objectives matched with the competencies, and thus as a result of it, is it going to help you to predict, based on the past behavior of the people, predict the future performance of them? Along with that, what kind of reliability your interview holds? So are you also able to relate it with the help of some statistical procedures, so that overall interview score gives you a clear understanding on what is going to be the future of the employee as well? We talk about ROIs from people, but can a beginning step like interview, and that too when it is behaviorally driven, then too when it is based on the competency of the job description, is it going to help us to predict the future both for the organization as well as for the employee in the long? So whichever format we take, that's why we say, irrespective of so much of growth in this particular field, we talk about effective talent retention, we talk about correct ways of talent acquisition, and so on. But the basic question to be asked is, are our interviews driven and oriented on the basis of behavior, which means experience-based or patterned behavioral interviews, and whether it has an inclusion of situation orientation or not? Because we select people on the basis of what kind of KSA they hold, what kind of past experience they hold, what are their achievements which they have established in their previous organization, and the basic reason of which why we want them to be a part of our organization. So very necessary is the fact that for every successful interview, the basic structure should be created in such a way where it is inclusive of the behavioral part, which we also call as the experience-based or patterned behavioral, and similarly it should also include the element of situational-based question. So for example, just if for example I ask, give me one situation wherein, if you ask an incumbent, give me a situation wherein you were able to use your decision-making trait or your decision-making ability to successfully convince somebody and help the organization. Or give me an example wherein you used your, say, presentation skills to influence somebody's opinion. So this is a very basic example of a behavioral question. How did you behave in that particular circumstances and those conditions? Other important aspect, as I said, is situationally. Give them some situations. Ask the applicant to imagine a set of circumstances and then indicate how would he or she respond to that situation. So for example, you ask him, you are managing a work group and you notice that one of your employees, he has become angry and very, very hostile in recent weeks. And the hostility and the anger is to such an extent that he or she is actually disrupting the entire group. So what would you do? In our CVs we write a lot because we have to market ourselves. But are we as interviewers, or are we as people who are responsible for acquiring the right talent, are our interviews designed in such a way wherein it is covering both the behavioral part as well as the situational? So this is one of the benefit, and this is one of the, we can say, this is one of the basic, that whenever we are talking about a successful interview, whenever we are especially talking about a holistic or a comprehensive interview, we have to take care of these two primary things: the content and the evaluation part, and of course whether it has an inclusion of behavioral as well as the situational based questions. And that is one reason, now when we will move ahead, we will possibly, I think, that is one reason why behavioral event interviews, or why behavioral description interviews, we also call them as BDIs, they came into the picture. So that is the, that is the response to the question, that two important elements while we are going for an.
Great. That was a technical analysis, I would say. Ma'am, thank you so much for that. If we want to summarize it in a very simple layman language, what exactly sets apart a BEI based interview from the different from the conventional interviewing techniques?
Yeah. So if you talk in terms of what is the difference, how is BEI different from any any unstructured or any structured interviews? So is that the question? Can I proceed for this?
Yes.
Yeah. So while we are talking about a structured interview, as I said, while we are talking about BEI, behavioral event interview is basically a competency-based assessment. So until unless we are clear with, for example, we have a designation, we have a job title, we have to be clear with what are the competencies which would be involved, which would be required to perform that task based upon the job descriptions or based upon the job specifications. But most of the times we fail because our competencies are not effectively designed. And if the competencies itself are not effectively designed, it is quite obvious that even when we are moving for our recruitment and selection processes, when we are moving for the basic process of interview, the way we are designing our questions or we are deciding our questions goes completely unstructured. So one benefit of BEI is it is a highly structured method of interviewing because it is based on competency-based assessments. And whenever we are talking about competency-based assessment, for every job title, we have different set of competencies. Few competencies, maybe they could be generic, certain competencies would be technical, certain competencies would be very much required, certain would be just the threshold competencies. So this is one exercise which the organization has to do. This is something which organization has to decide, because the definitions of the competencies, which we popularly call as, and every organization has its own set of competency dictionary. We all are knowing about a dictionary which we used to refer. Now we have Google for it or a thesaurus for it. But otherwise, in terms of competency, so that you can differentiate across different job titles and you can set the accountability also differently, we have a competency dictionary. So a structured interview, for example, a BEI-based structured interview is completely based upon the competency-based evaluation. A very interesting aspect of it could be, you may ask, that then why not should we go for psychometric-based instruments or psychometric-based exercise? That's a very, very prevalent way of assessing people. Psychometric assessments only give you idea about the potential of the people, especially when you are predicting the behavior of people for future goals. But when we are talking about techniques like behavioral event interview, it is based upon one important fact, that past behaviors are the best predictors for your future performance. So if we have experienced certain things in your previous assignment, in your previous organization, or as a part of your accomplishment in the previous places, it is quite obvious that with similar set of situations or with some different set of situations, you are expected to perform in a same manner. So why not assess people on the basis of what they have done, rather than giving a hypothetical understanding, or rather than believing that you have a situation which is not going to be applicable in your organization for the next 3 years, and you are assessing people for that. So that is one reason why structured interview has gained so much impetus. Simply understanding, for the sake of simplicity of our audience, A structured interview is something which uses behavioral questions to help the interviewers to identify what is the candidate's potential based upon those critical competencies which is pertaining to that particular job title. And now, with the help of those behavioral questions, how are you predicting it? And as I said, based upon the rating scale, because that is something which is going to be your distinctive factor. If you have whether you have a right rating scale to assess the potential as well as the performance of the people into it. So that is one way why your structured interviews are much better, whether we use it for training, for recruitment, for performance appraisal, for routine career planning, for our assessment centers and whatnot. I mean, right from procurement to retention of people. This is something which is going to help you because this data will be more reliable. This output can be taken for other HR functions for leveraging the other aspects of HR. So imagine when you have got right person and you have got the right characteristics based on the behavioral competencies at the recruitment level, right from the selection level. The same data you can use for your training while you are investing on your people. The same data you can utilize while you are doing the performance appraisal, while you are conducting your potential appraisals, and of course while you are working on the upward movement of people. That means during their promotion or their lateral progression. And even you can devise their reward strategies, their retention mindsets based on what the person is. What are his likes or dislikes or preferences? He may be a highly qualified person but is not a team player, or might not be very qualified but is a high team player. So you get a lot of combinations and permutations and a lot of predictions can be done when we are having behaviorally driven questions. And that is the reason why structured questions with the help of techniques like these. One other similar technique, for example, is a critical incident technique, because this could be one of the doubt in the minds of audience that why we are talking about BEI when we have already a very old technique, critical incident technique. Actually, critical incident technique only focuses on specific incidents. Whereas, while we are talking about BEI, you are taking a generically specified situation. It will help you to overall assess the incumbent or the candidate on similar situations as well as predict the future aspect. Whereas the critical incident technique has its own limitation that it can only work on some very specific situation. So that is one reason why even in these structured interview methods, we have BEI as a more successful player and a more sustainable player technique in comparison to a CA. Oh, to you, Sushil.
Right. That was very insightful, ma'am. And what we understand by the mentions of yours that corporates have to develop competency mapping for different roles, right? In terms of if they want to apply successfully the BI-based interview technique into hiring process. But the current answer leads us to our next question. If it is, how exactly is a BI-based interview conducted even for a large cap company or a medium-sized company as well? Is it possible for both of them to apply these kind of techniques to their recruitment drives?
Absolutely. And this is the heart of this, I think, discussion that how do we conduct BEI. So while we are talking about behavioral event interview, as I said, three things are very important to be understood. One is we have to prepare for the interview. Second is how do we conduct that interview. And finally, how do you review it? How do you evaluate it? So if we go to the first phase, we have to prepare ourselves for the BEI. So we decided, okay, for X number of job titles, BEI is one technique which we are going to use for whether it is for higher level positions, whether it is for foundation or the basic level position, or whether it is for, it is going to be used in a generic. Because there are certain prior preparations or there are certain essentials which the organization has to be pre-prepared before we are commencing for BEI. As I said, it is a competency-based, behaviorally question-driven interview. The first and the foremost thing, or as a pre-preparatory tool, what the organization has to be ready with in terms of the job titles for which you are planning to conduct BEI, whether it is for a routine whether it is for a routine performance appraisal exercise, whether it is for a routine training and development exercise, or whether it is specifically for some one specific HR function, say recruitment and selection. The first thing has to be, we have to be clear with why are we looking for it? Why or what is the objective of our BEI? So first, identify the relevant objectives, why we want it to be BEI driven. Secondly, be prepared with the competencies. If we have 5 job titles, we definitely should have a set of competencies which are controlling attributes of that job title. And once you have a complete set of competencies, say for example, for one job title, you have 5 different competencies. It could be business acumen, it could be your cross-cultural orientation, it could be your team building perspective, it could be any of your technical aspect as well, or it could be your leadership ability. And so if you have a set of 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 competencies, depending upon the stake and the severity of the job title or the accountability of the job title, first we have to be prepared with what are the competencies. And for every competency, there has to be a description. If at all it is decision making, what decision making means for me for somebody who's a shift in charge. Similarly, what would decision making mean for somebody who's at a C-suite level? Or if I say decision making, what am I expecting from somebody who's my training manager, to somebody who's my production manager? So depending upon the level or the hierarchy of your organization structure, and of course depending upon the kind of job title, there has to be a clarity on the definition of your competency, what that competency means for you. So if it is business acumen, what is business acumen for you, for the kind of role for which you are planning for conducting a BEI. So this is the most essential requirement in the first stage of BEI. Know the objectives, identify the competencies, and have your behavioral descriptions ready. Because based on these behavioral descriptions, you're going to prepare your questions for your BEI interview. Certain situational driven, certain would be your task driven, and also during those questions you will try to understand what people did when they were put into those situations. So to start with, first objectives have to be clear. Secondly, your set of competencies should be clear, and what each competency means, that has to be clear. So that now when you are through with this much of work, this much of first stage of preparation of interview, now you move to how do you conduct. So up to here you have your competencies, number one, you have the description of your competencies, and you also know what is the rating scale. We will talk about rating scale also, but as of now we are discussing how is it conducted. So then you should also have a rating scale so that you know if it is a 5-pointer or it is a 10-pointer or it is a closed type of options. Why am I opting it? Because a lot of idea you will get when you will look at your competency and their definitions. Now we come to phase number 2, which is how to conduct it. How do you conduct a BEI? So now with these set of things, you have your competencies, their definitions, you have your objectives, and of course you are now preparing yourself towards what kind of questions should I make. So now at the second stage, we use one of the model called STAR model, a STAR, wherein this acronym tells you about how to prepare questions based on the behavioral descriptions. So S stands for situation, T stands for task, A stands for action, and R stands for result. So the star is the backbone of how do you define and frame your questions. So whatever is the competency, you will try to prepare maybe 1, 2 or 3 set of questions, but which should cover all these 4 aspects. What was the situation? What was actually the task? What was the action which the incumbent or whoever you are interviewing, what he or she did? And finally, what is the outcome? So you see, with the help of this single acronym, with the help of this single method, the STAR model, you are able to come up with your set of questions which have a basis of your competencies, which have been derived from your competency definition. So this is STAR model, by way of which we prepare our behavioral questions, which cover all these 4 aspects. And finally, the last stage of this processes of conducting a BEI is now you go for finally evaluating, classifying, tabulating, and drawing your result. So whatever you have drawn based on this model, now you have a set of questions which you're going to ask. The way to conduct a BEI also differs. Your interviewers have to be ready. They have to be trained upon how to use. They have to be trained upon how you have to put up the questions. They should be trained that they don't simply have to listen, but they have to, like if we talk about some of the templates of BEI interviews, you have your competency, you have the description, you have your rating scale based on the competency, and then you have a space for writing notes. Why? Because for every question you have to take input, whatever you are listening based upon the discussion, you have to take a note upon what the person said. So that based upon your rating scale, you can possibly give whatever rating scale is, whether the person is far exceeding the requirement, whether the person needs improvement, what. So, and that is the basic. Whenever we are conducting a BEI, we tell this initially or before we commence the interview that this is going to be the way of how you are going to be interviewed. Whatever question is being asked, in between, as an assessor, I'm going to take my notes. And you can use some triggering questions also. You can use some popping questions as well. For example, just to confirm, because while people speak, they speak a lot, they will tell you a lot of things, but to catch the most important thing, you can also have some sub questions that maybe you can stop people by saying, did you actually meant that? Or if I've understood correctly, is this what you said? Or if you want to probe the person further, you can, based on the same, your aspect of STAR model, you can ask the person, tell me something more about this task. Did you had a heterogeneous team or a homogeneous team? Where was everyone of your same age group or other as well, and similar, depending upon the context. So this is a complete different subject of how do we prepare interviewers to conduct a BEI depending upon what kind of template you are following. So once you are done with this, now you make the ORCE framework. You observe, you record, you classify, and then you evaluate. And once you are done with this, then finally with the help of your ORS framework, and possibly if you are using some statistical tools also, because you are ranking people on a behaviorally anchored rating scale. That is the other beauty of BEI. You don't use a simple scale, you use bars. We call it as bars. Behaviorally anchored rating scales, in which you have a continuum. You are not saying is good or bad, is positive or negative. You are trying to draw a continuum to put the person on the continuum of where he or she lies. And as per the different competency, once you have a consolidated score, then you can rank. Based upon leadership, where does the person lies? Based upon business acumen, where does the person lies? And so on. So this is a complete process. You first identify the objective, identify your competencies, develop your competency definitions or descriptions. Based on that, prepare your questions with the help of STAR model, situation, task, action, and result. And finally, evaluate it based upon the rating scale, which you have developed for your specific BEI, and then present it depending upon whether you have conducted your BEI as an individual interviewer, whether you have conducted your BEI in a panel manner, and so on. So, for example, if I just give you one simple example, for example, purpose is you want to evaluate the person on multiple aspects. So, for example, you are using a very common competency. You can call it as this is a very generic competency, say time management. So, time management would be you can ask a person in order to assess the behavior. Have you worked under time constraints before? Give us some examples. Or were there any time wherein you struggled to meet a deadline? Tell us something about that. Or if you want to put it in a situational way, you can possibly ask, it's 4:30 on a Friday afternoon and your boss gave you some assignment which needs to be completed by Monday morning. And you have your own plans for the weekend. So in such situations, what would you do? Or maybe in a general sense, you can ask, tell me, what is your productivity and time management skill? How do you keep a balance between number of things which are assigned to you, and how do you respond to it? Or how do you decide that what percentage of time you have to spend on which functional area of your job? So this gives you a very clear understanding on you are trying to assess people on multiple perspectives, and thus all the competencies that you have identified, more or less it is. So that is the way how we conduct our BA.
Right. The STAR model, as you mentioned, Dr. Chaturvedi, it looks like seems to be the backbone and the driving force behind the BI techniques of interview.
Absolutely.
Right. It definitely leads us to the next question, that what are going to be the exact short-term and long-term benefits of doing this, implementation of the BI-based interview technique and switching from the conventional mode of interview where, one or two people who are going to be the bosses of the recruitee are going to be involved directly into the recruitment process, and they do it most of the times. Anything that comes to their mind, they ask the questions to the job candidate, depending upon their mood. So if they do this, the hard work of implementation of BI technique of interview into their recruitment process, what are exactly going to be the short-term and long-term benefits for them?
Right. Absolutely correct, Sushilji, because every technique has its own limitations also, and every technique has its own scope as well. So as I said, first the organization has to do his or her homework in terms of whether we are clear and whether we are prepared with clarity on our job descriptions, our competency dictionaries, and then we further move to, as you said in the beginning, we have to come up, the final outcome has to be based on the BIs. You can come up with your competency maps, you can come up with your competency matrices and so on, which are in multiple ways helpful for your effective people management and employee management. So if you look at the short-term and long-term benefits which we are talking about, one very important aspect, all of us understand that interviewing is the basic foundational function for any organization, whether it is for effective employer branding, whether it is for future employee retention, or in any way, whichever aspect we talk about, whether it is about productivity, whether it is our brand name and so on. One very strong advantage of using a BI is you completely remove the impact of misunderstandings about past experiences, because you are giving an opportunity to the candidate to describe himself or herself in detail as per the situation and how was their performance. So it is not like one-way journey. It is about you are asking the person to detail about how they behave based upon their potential, based upon their skill sets, their KSAOs, how did they respond to the situation. Other important advantage is it removes the impact of personal impressions, like whether it is a performance appraisal interview, whether it is a job interview, whether it is any further upward kind of interview for any upward movement. One very strong bias in every kind of interview is either the leniency effect, or maybe a very stringency error, or maybe some kind of projection errors. We try to see if we are able to see some similarities in the other person, we somehow become biased. So this is one technique which helps you to remove any kind of personal impressions. It reduces the chances. Also, it reduces the chances that a candidate will fake in the interview, because you are giving very specific questions based upon their past accomplishment, based on their past performance. You're giving them a new situation. So the interviewee or the incumbent cannot fake, cannot over exaggerate. If we talk about the interviewer's perspective, it allows the panel to hear the information about the candidate's performance and not the theory that you give a hypothetical situation and the person can speak, he or she can share a complete essay about it. So you are very specific, and thus you expect a very specific answer. That if you say that if you have worked on certain statistical tools or certain technical things, what were the software? Or which specific techniques did you use in your research? It is as simple as that. If you are using any kind of research, what was your basis of selecting your sample? So you are not talking about the definitions, the theory, you are directly coming to why did you use it. Similarly, absolutely the interview becomes more in-depth, and you are able to get an in-depth perspective of the challenges also of the job title, and whether the job title itself requires some more competencies to be added. That is one of the benefit. And a big benefit why most of the organizations are moving towards BI kind of technique is, even when you have in this kind of technique, when average, low performers, when they are interviewed as well as the high performers are interviewed, BEI will give you clear discrimination between the competencies which you require for top performers and the baseline competencies which you require for the acceptable performance. So you can very well chalk out. If I need best performers, at least this should be the scope. If I am okay with average kind of performance, even I can take people with that much of caliber or that level of KSOs also. So, and because one very beautiful fact we did not talk about it, possibly I missed, that the questions remain same for all the questions do not change, and it is only your perspectives while you are sharing this. It helps your interviewers to get a fair understanding upon who's lying and who's not. Some of these are some of the long-term benefits. Thus you are able to set a effective interview processes. You are able to utilize the time involved, the time which you have spent in preparing your competency dictionaries, the time which you have spent in preparing your behavioral questions, the time which you have spent in interviewing the people, because every BI doesn't take less than 2.5 hours. So imagine if you are taking 5 interviews based on the BEI with a complete understanding on, of course, depending upon the job title, you are investing a lot of time, you're investing a lot of energy. So if this is once synchronized, this data will help you in long term in the sense, as I said, whether it is for your training decisions, your appraisal decisions, your team buildings, your group formations. So if you have a cross-functional group, possibly based on your behavioral interviews questions, you can come to know even if these competencies are a must, and even if I have a certain set of people who are very experienced, are there any possibilities that they will be excellent team players, or based upon their descriptions or based upon the details which they gave, it seems they might be having some conflicts in between. There might be some ego issues, there might be some gender-based issues, there might be some value-based issues, and so. So, a lot of such things based on organization culture, based upon things which are not directly visible, you can predict it if your BEI has been very carefully planned. And the only limitation and the only challenge is it's very time taking. It requires a good time. You need a highly trained interviewer. Then you have to be very clear with which series of jobs am I going to analyze with the help of BEI. And it is not only solely based upon the past behavior, you are predicting your future behavior based upon the inputs. And it is not critical incident, as I said. So how are you going to take the big advantage of it will depend upon how well you have synchronized it from your different HR subfunctions. So if the organization is prepared, this is one thing which will lead you, of course, to excellence. Oh.
Right. So as you mentioned, Dr. Chaturvedi, that one has to include and involve somebody from the HR team who has time on their hands, and of course they have to be professionally trained on conducting BEI based interview techniques. Right. So it automatically makes us think that what exactly is going to be the implementation cost of such technique which involves somebody who is specifically trained on BEI techniques.
Absolutely. Actually, there could be different choices. If we are trying to bring a consultant from outside, those charges are absolutely different depending upon the kind of consulting firm, depending upon what are their expectations, and of course depending upon what is the scope of and what is the to what extent you want BEI to be implemented at your place. Because basic things in terms of time I can tell you, because it is difficult to comment upon. Money, that will depend upon what kind of organization is it, how well are you organized in terms of your clarity in your job titles, in your job descriptions, whether you have a pre-prepared set of competencies, whether the basic job elements, from the job elements you have to derive and you have to design and you have to define your competencies. Then who's doing this task? Are you having sufficient manpower to do it? Are you people already trained inside? Or whether you want the consultant, whether internal or external, to completely do it for you. So identifying the core competencies, working upon your rating scales, developing your rating scales, developing your rating guide. Then once you have collected the data, how you have to manage those transcripts, how you have to convert them into respective classifications, either with the help of your statistical procedure or maybe with the help of some because now we have n number of techniques which help you to analyze the text part also. So you could do a sentiment analysis. One can do with the help of different softwares. For example, NVivo is one software which is even able to do your emotional analysis and sentiment analysis. So depends upon what tool are you using and how much internally your people are prepared or they have an idea. So if you're completely outsourcing the function, we all understand will depend upon the choice of the consultant and his or her success story. But if we are training people inside, and if it is a small organization, then I think if we come up with a basic headers of cost, and then we work upon, depending upon your workforce, depending upon the number of job position, depending upon whether you wish to start from some specific job titles or whether you want BI for everybody. So that would vary the cost. But of course, in terms of time, you need clarity, and once it is done, it's not a costly.
Right. Thank you so much for that insightful information on the process and implementation part of the BI technique, Dr. Chaturvedi. We are currently living in the times of COVID, and of course, some or the other way, the COVID-19 situation, the pandemic has affected everything, and one of the most affected parts do remain, including the recruitment, which is a big question mark for a lot of big MNCs as well as small and medium cap companies as well. The question is that whether if they try to implement the BI technique currently, what should exactly be the process? I mean, how can it benefit them in the current new normal?
Absolutely, it's a very relevant and I think the most a very, very appropriate one, because see, these conditions of course have a very compelling effect. But you see, those people who are retained somewhere or the other, forget the monetary pressure on the organization, forget whether it is a very compelling decision to continue somebody to whom are you giving a very heavy pay packet. But for every organization, that is one reason why talent at workplace is one topic of very pivotal importance. Mentoring talent or managing talent and sustaining talent is something which is a challenge for everyone in every organization. Whether we are running under uncertain conditions like as of present, or whether it is even in normal conditions, to retain talent is actually a very Herculean task. So if we talk in terms of present context, how BI can be helpful, BI can be a very facilitative tool for you to see which set of your people can be very resilient, which set of your people can be psychologically very strong, or which set of your people are clear about or are they owing the competencies which are required. Because what actually are competencies? Competencies simply are the behavior which we as employees reflect based upon the strategic goals of organization and which is measured through our performance. Those are simply competencies. One can go for any technical definition of competencies, but it is simply this: are you able to align yourself with your organization goal or not in terms of your job type? So one who is very clear with the set of competencies which is a part of his or her job profile, one who knows how to respond irrespective of toughness or normalcy of the situation, is clear with and is able to give the best. Understanding the today's context, BI can be helpful to even if for example you are conducting a BI on your present set of people who are very, very important for you, your talent workforce, your crucial people, like the super performance category, people who are very, very difficult to predict, and the talent loss would be huge if you lose them. So for example, if you wish to start with them, so that would be one advantage wherein you will be able to subjectively assess and then quantifiably you can convert what is something which is going in their minds, because this is a psychologically supported tool. So while you ask them, understanding your business acumen, understanding your previous achievements which you have given to this organization, what else you feel in the present context, what should be done. So when you are doing it for your concurrent workforce, for your present workforce at different levels of your organization, you get a fair idea upon what is bothering people apart from the challenges in terms of your monetary promises or your incentive promises. The other things, so apart from rewards, apart from both monetary and non-monetary rewards, what other things in terms of organization culture, in terms of the work environment, in terms of peer pressure, in terms of expectations for the future, what else is going on in their minds, so that you can assess, am I in a position to prepare my people as resilient people or as resilient workforce which can overcome these tough situations as well. Similarly, while we are interviewing people, while we are nominating them for any kind of training, or while we are upskilling them in these times, especially we saw a great projection wherein people have upskilled themselves in their own fields. So while you are supporting such causes, this must be a result of feedback which is being taken by the organization, that this is a high time and this is a good time wherein we invest in our people and make them so competent that rather than being dependent upon the external hiring, we are doing that internal nurturing a lot. We are training our people within the organization, the present workforce, in such a way wherein we are saving upon our external hires. And similarly, how are they accommodating themselves with the present organization culture, so that there are lesser conflicts, lesser differences, and thus a peaceful and amicable working. So you put it at any aspect, whether it is negotiating with people's mind, or whether it is negotiating with their relationship management skills, or whether you are negotiating with their workplace behavior. All these things they do have an answer when we are taking support of PEI, but depends upon which context are we in.
Great insight, Dr. Chaturvedi. Thank you so much for that. We have slightly moved ahead beyond our scheduled time of 45 minutes, but just one last,
apologies for that.
Yeah, but just one last question from my end. We have understood about the basic concept of BEI implementation, how exactly it is different from the conventional method of interviews, and how exactly we can successfully implement it, the process behind it, the science behind it. One question which comes to my mind is that once an organization has successfully implemented the BEI, they have recruited the candidate. Is there anything that they need to do to sustain, the post-recruitment benefits of BEI for a longer duration of time for a particular team of employees or the leadership team, maybe, for example?
Absolutely. Because once we have done it, how do we reap the benefits for long? Right. So a very short answer to this will be, as we have already spoken about the basic elements of it and what is important to maintain it. Because once you have recruited, the next step would be the person will be continuing with that profile, with that job description, based upon the competencies of that job position, and then he will be due for promotion based upon whatever his performance is, based on your performance evaluation and of course the potential appraisals. So if the competency identification is being done seamlessly, it will be very easy for both the organization or the reporting head or the unit in charge, and as well as of course for the employee, that he or she is very clear with what is my next career anchor. He or she knows that in order to jump to that career anchor, what I have to further imbibe, what I have to assimilate. So very important point to sustain the benefit of post BEI is, don't stop. Even if it is a feedback which is to be given to your people, try to use behavioral questions. Try to use a STAR framework while you are giving or receiving feedback from your people. Use it in your routine brainstorming sessions, or while you are doing a meeting or your discussion, your brainstorming sessions. Use the behavioral based question, because certain things, with our psychological makeups, we are like that. We never say things directly. We always need an indirect approach to put our things. So that way, and especially when it is about a relationship between a junior and a senior, or whenever there is a hierarchy. So in order to get the utmost out of people and to get a fair understanding of what people have in their minds, because mind management is something which is a very tough thing. and everybody has a different psychological makeup. So in that also BEI can be used in a routine way. Make it a practice, and that way one will always be in a position, whether it is a post-appraisal interview, whether it is a training feedback, whether it is your monthly meetings. I mean, align it as per your behavioral event and competency-driven questions, and you always know what is in the mind of people.
Right, Dr. Chaturvedi, thank you so much for that insightful information about the BEI implementation and reaping the success even after successfully implementation and recruiting the right talent for the firm. Quickly going for one of the audience questions that we have from Mr. Arvind Tripathi. We wanted to know that what exactly is the success rate? Do we have that any statistics in place? What is the success rate of BEI based interviews in getting the right candidates?
Absolutely. Yeah, very good question. And Mr. Tripathi, because it depends upon who's collecting the data. Like, we are researchers, we are academicians, we have a lot of research papers, we have a lot of literature review on how well it is successful. If you want to have a quick view of that, possibly you can look at different longitudinal studies and the survey reports from different consulting firms, possibly the big fours, which keep on conducting, or maybe you can look at the reports of Deloitte or any other big four, because this is a routine part. You will see that they repetitively talk about the success ratio of BEI as one of the technique for supporting not only even the relationship, but also for long-term, you can say long-term performances. So for a quick glance and for a quick review, I would suggest Mr. Tripathi to have a look at the sometimes half-yearly and sometimes yearly reports of any big consulting firms, any of the big firms, because we have seen almost all of them, they continuously are working upon the benefits of BEI. But yeah, one has to search upon the exclusive reports of BEI-based interventions.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Chaturvedi. In fact, I would also like to share in the ending notes that at Amity Institute of Training and Development, we also have, have been trying to cater to the corporate training and development requirements, and we indeed developed a module on the BEI interview technique, which was initially raised and was made a query by one of the corporate clients of ours. So we do have one of the training programs in place right now with a 2-module setup for the BEI based interview technique program for the L&D and HR professionals.
Absolutely.
Right. I hope Mr. Arvind Tripathi got his answer. At the end of the session, I would like to thank Dr. Chaturvedi for sharing very detailed insights into the implementation, how exactly to reap the benefits of the BEI technique, and how exactly even the small cap business houses as well as the large business houses have been and should be using the BEI implementation into their recruitment tools. They have been doing it in the past as well, but now the times are changing, and even in the current new normal, it looks like with the help of the techniques, the science behind the research and development of BEI technique still holds very true, and it will be very helpful for the coming future as well. With that note, Dr. Chaturvedi, we would like to thank you once again, and once given an opportunity, would definitely like to go on for another discussion with you, as we just could not gather the momentum of time, and we had to go beyond the scheduled time to get the insights that were so helpful and very meaningful, that we really enjoyed the session. And I hope the same for the for all the participants coming in from corporates and students as well. Thank you so much, ma'am.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much.